So the aspirin molecule as a drug is fairly simple, and recognizing the parts includes looking at functional groups. So number one is a benzene ring. That's the scaffold that is the normal starting point for many drugs and medicines. Number two is the carboxylic acid functional group. That's COOH. And then in number three is an ester group. So that's the carbon, double bond oxygen, single bond oxygen, and then the rest of the molecule. So this is another carbon here, and here's another carbon here. The rest of the molecule is on either side of the ester group. The presence of functional groups allows for reactions to occur, like on the carboxylic acid or the ester, but it's also the shape of the molecule. So having the specific shape allows these functional groups to be in a position for a chemical reaction. So aspirin was originally this salicin, which was originally isolated from the bark of this white willow tree. The structure aspirin that we have now is quite different from the active ingredient in the bark. So that's where chemists come in and understanding what parts of this structure are the important parts as far as the shape, as well as the functional groups. So in the pharmaceutical industry now, what they usually start with is compounds like this salicylic acid that's very close to the natural product. So this is salicylic acid reacting with, this is an ester with a ketone on here. And then this combination produces this aspirin molecule. The proper name is acetyl salicylic acid, but here's the benzene ring, the carboxylic acid, and that ester group. What aspirin does is there are beneficial effects. It's a pain reliever, fever reducer, anti-inflammatory. It's also non-addictive, non-toxic, and has possibilities to prevent colorectal cancer and has been shown to prevent heart attacks, stroke, and blood clots for many different purposes. It is considered a wonder drug still, but there are side effects like heartburn, nausea, and this is a serious one, Ray's syndrome, ringing in the ears, rash and itch, or shortness of breath. These are long-term side effects as well. Because aspirin has so many side effects, there have been questions that it might not have been approved by current FDA Food and Drug Administration standards. The FDA regulations are super important in rules for vaccine development that's going on now. So a vaccine or any medication has to have proven experimental results, and these results have been proven through clinical trials that were run initially on animals and then on people, which includes control groups. In the clinical research, it involves the vaccine being tested on volunteers from small groups and then moving on to larger groups. And in the government review, it's determined whether this vaccine helps more than hurts. So there cannot be a lot of side effects. And only then can it be approved by the government and manufactured and distributed to the public. How does aspirin work? Well, aspirin and other drugs produce physiological effects. These are almost always involved in altering the chemical communication system in the body. This is a very complex system with many intersecting communication pathways. And this is how aspirin can have all these different beneficial effects. As a fever reducer, this means that it affects the brain. As a pain reliever, this is going to affect a different part of the brain. And anti-inflammatory, well, that means it works in the muscles and joints, reducing swelling and inflammation, and that's a whole other region where aspirin has an effect. Analgesics are pain-relieving drugs, and aspirin is an analgesic. These are the more popular analgesics used now: ibuprofen, also known as Advil or Motrin, and acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol. So these are the structures of these three analgesics. And what do these three structures have in common? Well, they all have in common this benzene ring that stands out. And on that benzene ring, there are two substituents. There are two additions. So this aspirin has the carboxylic acid and the ester group. So ibuprofen and acetaminophen are very similar, and it's also why these have taken over and are more effective analgesics than aspirin, because what's slightly different is the two groups are on either side of that benzene ring. So here is a group on this side that has the carboxylic acid a little further out from the ring. And this acetaminophen has a carboxylic acid portion. So this is the ketone group with an amine group together and a little bit removed from the rest of the ring. Then on the other side of the acetaminophen, there's an alcohol group. And then for ibuprofen, there's also a group on the other side that's just some hydrocarbon. But the structure implies that whatever the action is in the body requires a certain shape of this drug. And the other thing that's required of the drug to be an analgesic for fever reducing and pain reducing is to have these functional groups across from each other with potentially a ketone group a little bit off the ring on one side. This results in similar functions in the body, having a certain structure with certain functional groups on that structure.